Hello, everybody. I am Sherri Snelling. I am a corporate gerontologist, author, and CEO of the Caregiving Club, and I'm also host of the Caregiving Club Newscast. We are in season 1, and this is episode 12. Here in the month of August, many people are on vacation and enjoying the summer and celebrating America's 250 anniversary and birthday, which is wonderful. But there's so much news that happened, and particularly because August has a lot of celebrations that relate to a lot of the things that I do in caregiving and wellness. And in fact, August is National Wellness Month. So as we dive into our 4 segments for this episode, our first segment, of course, is always Caregiver Wellness News. Lots of stuff happening. We're going to tell you about a couple of things. First of all, we're going to touch upon 2 wellness trends. One is hyperbaric oxygen, which is trending in the longevity wellness space, but also something called Methylene Blue. You may or may not have heard of this. We're going to tell you a little bit about it. And does it actually have properties that help improve cognitive function? That's the question that hopefully we'll try to answer with all the information and research that we did. And then, of course, in August, on August 3rd, it's National Friendship Day. And we noticed that something's trending on TikTok and in social media, and it's called trauma bonding. Now, trauma bonding is a term that's been around for a long time, and it usually has related to domestic violence victims, but the way it's being used now on social media is different, and it's around bonding around sadness and depression and loss, and particularly if you're grieving a loved one. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then August is also National Make a Will Month, and we came across some statistics around how many people over 50 actually have a will, which you certainly should have by 50. And I think the numbers will surprise you. So we're going to talk about that. And that's part of your financial wellness, by the way, of my 7 wellness elements out of my Me Time Monday book. And then finally, August 26th is National Dog Day. And I have to do a shout out to my little fur baby. She's 10 this year. She turned 10 on August 8th. And we're also going to talk about a new study that came out about how there is a connection, of course, between humans and dogs, but it has to do with positivity. And this is a really interesting study. So we're going to share a little bit of that with you. Then in Well Home Design, we're going to talk about, again, I'm writing my 3rd book, The Snug Home. Part of that is what I call the 5 C's. And one of those C's is curves. And we're going to talk about this trend in home design, which goes from curb appeal to curves appeal. So what is that? And then we're also going to talk about how many people actually do have a lifetime plan to stay in their home. We know most people want to stay in their home as long as possible, but do you really have a plan? And you have to, just like you have to have a retirement plan in order to stay in that home, have it be safe, have it be accessible, and have it build wellness around you. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to turn to caregiving in the marketplace, or in the workplace, because I do a lot of work, of course, with employers. And I want to just do a reading, if you will, of the recent People magazine just did Companies That Care, top 100 companies that care. And I was very excited that 7 of those 100 companies really focused on either caregiving support or older adult support. We're going to do a shout out to those 7 companies and read through those. And then finally in pop culture, very tragic news that just broke a couple of days ago about the actress Hayden Panetierre, who recently was found dead at the age of 36. There's still a lot of question marks about, how this came about. Was it natural causes? Did she have, a heart attack? Were drugs involved? We'll go through all that. But more importantly, I want to use this as a place to talk about caregiver burnout. You may question, well, was she a caregiver? Not necessarily, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. She did have a very young daughter, but we're going to talk about some of these celebrity tragedies and how they do relate to caregiver burnout and how we have to know the signs and be mindful of those that we love, whether it's us, ourselves that are the caregivers, or whether it's a family member or a friend or whatever. So we also want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're releasing these newscasts as often as we can. I think in the summer we got We got caught up with the summer fun, and I did give my staff the month of July off. So we haven't done maybe as many, but we're going to get back on track in September. We're releasing at least 2 a month. We're also doing all of our podcast interviews with experts. I've got more videos coming out on self-care in 7 minutes, how to, and some free webinars and all kinds of stuff. So check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, and you'll get notified every time we post something new there. And we really appreciate you as our subscribers. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into our caregiver wellness news. So for caregiver wellness news, before we dive into all the studies and headlines and things I want to share with you, I wanted to do a little upfront kind of introduction to wellness. And a lot of this comes out of my book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life. And, even years ago, I mean, the book is now 3 years old, and I researched it the 2 years before that. So it's been about 5 or 6 years that I've been really focusing in on the wellness industry and the wellness movement, if you will. And what's really interesting is all of a sudden, now that the book has been out, I kind of feel like, wow, I was, at the tipping point, if you will, of when things really started to become pervasive with wellness, but now everything is wellness. And as I write in the book, there's wellness tuna fish, there's wellness toothpaste, there's wellness pillows, there's wellness this and that. Everything has wellness attached. And when you start to overuse a word like wellness, and it happens every so often, marketers just, they pile on, they get a hold of a word and everybody goes, oh, that's really good. It's working. Let's figure out a way we can connect to wellness. It kind of takes away the true essence of what wellness is. And then, of course, there's a lot of quote unquote influencers out there, people on TikTok, people like Gwyneth Paltrow and her Goop, and others who purport to be wellness experts. And I write about that in the book. I'm not going to go into it here, but I really use that word expert selectively, because I don't think that you're an expert if you're just being fed a script to read, or maybe you've had, one experience here or there. I think, you have to have a pretty broad-based understanding and expertise to really be called an expert, right? So anyway, all that said, what I wanted to share with you is my perspective on wellness, at least from all the research that I've done. And wellness is an interesting industry because, again, it's being used as a marketing term, but when you really think about it, wellness is not prescriptive. It is instructive. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a lot of people out there that'll say, hey, drink this 3 times a day, do this 4 times a day, make sure that you're doing this or whatever. And that is prescriptive. And it's a one-size-fits-all formula and solution, which we know isn't realistic. And so when it comes to wellness, what I write about is I like to give good information. So, I will share, like, if you do this for 7 minutes a day, this is the benefit that you'll get or whatever. But I'm not saying that will necessarily work for you. And that's why in the book, I break down your life basically into 7 different elements. And, things like physical health, emotional health, social health, intellectual health, financial health, spiritual health, financial health, or financial wellness. All of these things are wellness elements, and they all kind of play a part in an overall sense of joy and balance and happiness. And that is really ultimately what we're trying to achieve, right? I mean, it's even written into the Constitution, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. But happiness is defined differently by each of us. So the other thing about wellness is, besides being instructive, so you take all this information that you're hearing from me and all the other wellness people out there, and you have to absorb it and decide what really works for me. And that's why wellness is personalized. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not everybody do this and you're all going to feel the same way. you really have to personalize your wellness. And that's really important because it gives you power, right? It gives you power over your own happiness, your own sense of balance in life. Very often, I think we feel overwhelmed, we become anxious, maybe even depressed. We have lots of stress on us, and particularly for caregivers, because you're taking on this whole new world of caregiving, particularly for an older loved one. And all of a sudden, life is out of balance. And so I write about something called Kawanakwatsi, which is a term in the Hopi Indian language that means life out of balance. And it's actually based on a documentary that was done back in the 70s. But it really speaks to all the technology. And you think about this being written and done in the 70s. Think about the technology we have now in our life with AI and Chat GPT and all these other things that we're trying to learn and absorb, and social media, which has come on, in the last few years and overtaken our lives. So even back then, they were noticing that there was an imbalance to a wellness perspective because technology was starting to suck up so much of our attention. It was keeping us inside instead of letting us get outside into nature. And the calming and soothing parts of nature are a big part of wellness, and using your five senses to really focus on the things that you feel immersed in, that make you feel calm, that make you feel happy, whatever it is. So these are all the kind of things in my book. And then we get into the Me Time Monday program, which, as I said, breaks down wellness into 7 elements, uses Monday as your set point and your reset point, and keeps you kind of on that cycle, if you will, of consistency. So you can read all about that in the book. I'm not going to go through that now. But I just felt it was important to really define wellness in terms of how I see it, which is not how the marketers are using it. Tuna fish, wellness tuna fish is not going to bring balance into your life, okay? Might be nutritious, might be good for you, and that's one piece of it. That's your physical wellness. But it's not going to bring you an overall sense of wellness. So anyway, you can read more about it in the book, but I wanted to just set the tone because it is National Wellness Month here in August. So let's get into a couple of these trends that I've been seeing. A lot of people are focused on longevity, all those bonus years, 20, 30 years now that we're going to be living that we may not have expected to. If you think about it, back in 1900, the average lifespan was 47 years old. Well, we've kind of almost doubled that, right? I mean, Dr. Michael Roizen, who wrote a really great book called The Great Age Reboot, said 90 is the new 40. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but we do know people are living longer, and ourselves, we have to prepare and kind of plan a little bit ahead for that. So these longevity kind of wellness trends, or biohackers, seem to be a little bit more like for people who have a lot of money, because let me tell you, people are spending a fortune on, cold plunges and saunas and, other types of things that are in their homes or in their backyards or whatever. But a couple of them I found kind of interesting, and I just wanted to go through it because could be some connection for the rest of us who don't have a fortune to spend on wellness, but are still looking to find that that better balance in life. So what is the hyperbaric oxygen trend? You may have heard of this. It's called HBOT, Hyperbaric Oxygen Therapy. And oxygen, of course, is something that we know through hundreds and maybe even thousands of years of science helps the body heal and, helps repair cells and things like that. As we age, so as we get into these bonus years, there's something called sentience that's happening throughout life. Sentience actually means that it's the aging process, and our cells divide and then make new cells, and that's kind of how we continue to look good, feel good, whatever. But at one point, and it actually at several points in our lives as adults, we start to experience sentience, which means that the cells are dying instead of dividing and rebuilding. And that's why you get gray hair. That's why your eyesight declines and your hearing is not so great. And maybe, the microbiome gut's not working as well as it should, or all of these different things. You get the what we call liver spots. Now they're the dark spots that you get on your hands or whatever. Um, all those things are usually part of aging, typical for many of us, and it's based on sentience. That's what we learned as gerontologists. Now, for October coming up, I wrote a blog last year. I think I may have done a video on this too, but there's also something called zombie cells. And zombie cells are where sentience kind of goes awry. And what it means is that the cells are dividing, but instead of rebuilding or just dying off, they actually just stay there, but they're divided, they're kind of decaying. And this is where we can see, inflammation starts, and that's how we develop things like cancer. So, those are the zombie cells that sometimes live in our bodies. And you'll learn more about that in October when I talk a little bit more about that. But going back to the oxygen, so a lot of people are doing this oxygen or hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Most people are doing it under the supervision of a doctor, which is good. And they're doing it because they are trying to repair certain cells. Maybe they've had certain treatments, and this is going to help. I know people, and I'm basing this on my personal experience with a friend of mine who recently did have some plastic surgery done, and she looks fantastic. But she had to go get the oxygen therapy again to help that healing process. So a lot of people use this in different ways. Pro athletes have used it as a recovery after they've played a game or been in a performance or whatever. It also, throughout the years, has been used to treat things like lung disease. Also, scuba divers who experience, that equilibrium and, feel like their heads are going to explode or whatever. They are usually treated with an oxygen therapy. And usually what it is, they put you in kind of a chamber. It's almost like it looks like maybe like you might get an MRI. Now, some of them are big rooms. You actually can sit, but usually it's a single person chamber. You go, you get into it, and the oxygen therapy is delivered that way. Some others are not so invasive. Now, the reason why I bring this up for Wellness Month is that a lot of people, and again, it's the biohackers. So it's the people, I like to think it's like the tech titans in Silicon Valley who all want to live until, they're 200 or whatever. There are now these oxygen chambers that you can buy. They're called soft cells that you can buy for home therapy. Now, this is where we get into the trickiness of wellness, right? Some wellness things and most wellness, in my opinion, should be very simple, very easy to do, not cost you anything or at least very little, and not be something that is risky. We want to stay away from risk, really, if you're seeking that wellness. But these longevity wellness folks, think that this is going to work. So they're bringing this stuff into the home, not under supervision of any kind. And that's where it can become very dangerous. The other thing is, if you do decide to enter into this new kind of therapy, and again, as I said, it's got a lot of really positive properties, and it helps people in different aspects of their health and certainly their longevity, because it is going to help repair those cells and help those cells, not the sentience, not die off as quickly, but help them still divide and rebuild. And so all of that is good. But again, you should probably do it under a doctor's guidance, because a lot of the wellness clinics are not FDA approved. So if you go to a doctor and you are, let's say, like my friend who got the oxygen therapy after her surgery, that's under a doctor's guidance. And they're setting, all the settings are correct. They're not giving you too much or whatever, and doing it the right way. If you go to a wellness clinic, the wellness clinics are not under FDA approval. And that's something we need to know. A lot of these wellness clinics are popping up They're offering a lot of different therapies and different treatments, which is great, but you have to be mindful that not just because it says wellness on the door going in doesn't mean you're going to be well when you leave. In fact, you can actually do some damage to your overall health. So you just want to be careful, do your research, talk to your doctor, whatever it is, but just know that it's not regulated in a safety perspective when you go to a wellness clinic unless they have a certain certification, and some of them do, and you can ask them that. And if they are able to offer that, then that should give you better peace of mind. So anyway, the cost of these sessions are, like I said, not cheap, $6,000 sometimes. The ones that my friend got, I don't know that they were that much. And some of it would, of course, be covered maybe under insurance. When it's a elective surgery, it's usually not. But the studies that have been done that show that there is this improvement in cognitive functioning, because this is where I really got into it. I really started researching it because there were a couple studies that came out that said, hey, if you do this hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you're going to improve your cognitive function. You're going to have better executive functioning later in life, or as you're older and you do it, you're going to maintain that good executive functioning and cognitive health and all that. The problem is, and as you know, I dig into these studies, there are no studies that have been done on a very, what I would call, rigorous validity scale. And that means they're only studying like maybe 25 to 50 people. And it might be people that are younger, not older. So I just feel like it's not the science-backed, evidence-backed studies aren't there yet. They're certainly, I'm sure, working on them. But just know that when you see something like, oh, you can do oxygen therapy and it's going to improve your cognitive health, that isn't proven yet. That isn't a causal relationship in terms of all the studies that have been done so far. So just a couple of cautionary comments, and I'm just looking to make sure I covered everything. I think I did. The next trend in wellness, and this one's really interesting because, again, it's in both of these have been used throughout hundreds, if not thousands of years, and yet they seem new because they're getting a lot of attention now in this wellness movement and wellness trend. It's called methylene blue, or blue methylene, but most people call it methylene blue. I don't know if you've heard of it. I had not. And in all the studies that I did as a gerontologist in biology, it hadn't really come up. But all of a sudden, it is emerging now. Again, it is being, positioned and marketed as something that helps with cognitive function. And it's one of those what we call nootropics. Now, nootropics are supplements that are usually positioned to help the brain. So it's, brain function and neuronal cellular makeup is what nootropics are all about. So lots of people, mostly I see mostly men, which is interesting. I haven't seen a lot of women celebrities or people of authority out there talking about it, but podcaster Joe Rogan, HHS Secretary RFK Jr., they have not necessarily fully endorsed it, but they have done it. They've said they've seen positive effects and all of that. So what is methylene blue? Well, basically, it is a synthetic dye, and you put it in water and drink it. Now, a lot of people think, are you kidding me? I'm not going to drink a dye. I hear about this, red dye, blah, blah, that is bad for me. And dyes are being taken out of our diets instead of inserted, right? But the difference with the methylene blue is, as opposed to all the other dyes out there, it is not made of petroleum, which is basically crude oil. And that's where the negativity for your health appears, when there's crude oil in the dye. So methylene blue does not have that. It was founded in the 1860s, and it was basically used to treat malaria, and very positively, by the way. Lots of success using it in that instance. So if you will, that's the prescription that is kind of approved for malaria. But it's now being used to to maybe see if we can slow the progression, prevent the onset of things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Can it help people with epileptic seizures? Can it help people with MS? All of these studies are being done with methylene blue because we're looking so much more at the brain. We understand the brain, and knowing how the brain interacts with methylene blue with malaria, they were seeing some positive trends that could help with these other diseases. Could also help with brain injury and pain management that typically, is being emanating from the brain. So it's really interesting. Now, there's cautionary things out there. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do anything like take this without a doctor guiding you. People who have mental health issues, maybe depression or anxiety, and they may be on SSRIs. There is sometimes a negative interaction with serotonin, which is what those drugs are used to do, is to give you better balance in that serotonin hormone. And blue methylene may mess with that. So or methylene blue may mess with that. You want to be careful about that. I got interested in this because I watch something on YouTube called the Behavior Panel. I don't know if many of you are familiar with them, but it's for men who have been in like the Secret Service. One of the gentlemen is a English, and he was in, I think, MI6 or MI5, and they've worked with the military. They've done a lot of stuff with corporate CEOs, but it's all based on the body language, really reading body language and understanding the psychology of that. So one of these four gentlemen on the behavioral panel is Chase Hughes, who I really like, and he has something really interesting called temporal lobe epilepsy. And it is not where you get a seizure, it's actually where you just kind of go blank. And he was noticing it, I think he's in his 40s. He was noticing it as he was on the behavioral panel, and all of a sudden the four of them talk, right? And they come to him and he just goes blank. So he talks about this, and he talks about how much it was interfering with his daily life and, being a father and a husband and all these other things. And so he sought out a lot of experts in what was going on with his brain and how to treat this. And he was led to the methylene blue, and he said it's been like a miracle drug for him. Now, again, this doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, but he said it's controlled his seizures. It's given him, back that sharp kind of cognitive functioning that he felt he was losing. He was getting a lot of brain fog because of this disease. So it is something to be mindful of. Potentially, maybe, again, we don't have the science yet to really show the causal effect that, okay, if you take methylene blue, your cognitive functioning, again, is going to be fantastic, or you're going to slow your Alzheimer's, or you're going to prevent Parkinson's. We don't know that yet. But just be aware that this is something out there. If you have a loved one who is fighting debilitating things going on in the brain, you may want to ask about methylene blue. The other thing just related to blue is, as you guys know, I do the how to self-care in 7 minutes videos for our YouTube channel, and we have one called Blue Wellness. And since it's August and it's summer, and blue makes me think of the ocean, this how-to video is really all about how to use blue, whether it's color psychology, whether it is nature and water, how to bring about wellness. And again, everything that I try to do in those videos is based on 7 minutes or less, because I realize that as caregivers, you've got no time to practice any of this stuff. So moving on in our caregiver wellness, topics of the day, August 3rd was National Friendship Day. And I came across something that was happening on TikTok and on Instagram, and it's called trauma bonding. And what is kind of interesting is that term, by the way, has been around for a very long time. 25 plus years ago, I worked with a wonderful organization in Southern California that helped the treatment and the support for rape victims And trauma bonding was something that was used in the domestic violence, particularly domestic violence communities, to describe the fact that a lot of these, particularly women who were victims of domestic violence, they would go back because they had done this trauma bonding with their attacker. And now it's been twisted a little bit. So the modern twist on trauma bonding that we're seeing in social media is more around connecting with people in social media who have gone through something really horrific in their life that is about loss. It could be the loss of your dog. It could be the loss of a friendship. It could be the loss of a spouse or a partner, or maybe the loss of a job, but whatever the trauma is about loss, then you're bonding with others who have experienced that same thing. You guys are finding, a conversation in that trauma bonding, and maybe even developing a support network through that. And there are, of course, support networks for a lot of this stuff, but I thought it was kind of interesting. And, it is the thing that worried me about one of the headlines that I saw, and I think it was on Instagram, is there was a video posted and it said, trauma bond with besties, which means these new friends that you develop through trauma, instead of talk therapy. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is something that gerontologists talk a lot about. It's used very successfully in treating things like anxiety and situational depression, even sometimes clinical depression, which is more longer term. Um, but it certainly has been proven to have some really positive results. And yet, again, here we go with the Instagram, TikTok influencers that say, yeah, blow off that talk therapy and come join the trauma bonding besties community. Again, support is important wherever you can find it. But I also think that you don't want to necessarily just throw out an entire place of psychology and that's being done to help people through PTSD and other traumas and things that they experience that they can get with their therapist. So just be careful when you see these headlines. It's intriguing, it sparks interest, but you have to know that there is a good blend between being able to treat yourself or having a group of people that support you as you're going through something challenging or even devastating, and getting professional help. There's kind of a blend there. You have to decide for yourself what works best, but just throwing out all the professional side of things, I think, is not in the best interest of people who are really seeking better wellness. And, it has to do a lot too with dopamine. So the rewards of trauma bonding are that maybe you develop this new friendship. The one thing I will tell you, and that I studied and I write about in my book, the four hormones of happiness, dopamine is one of them, serotonin is another, endorphins. But oxytocin is a really important one. It is our love, trust, bonding hormone. And you don't really get it online. People have said, oh, yeah, you can do a video chat and still get oxytocin. Okay, maybe. But what I know about oxytocin is that it is only created when you're in person, when you're staring into someone's eyes, you're feeling the warmth maybe of their skin or their body near to you, or holding your hand. Um, that's where it really comes from, in person. And you don't get that online. So all of these people that are talking about blow off maybe your in-person sessions with your therapist and just do trauma bonding online, you're not going to get the oxytocin that you need. And oxytocin is, again, it's a happiness hormone, and it's a survival hormone. And if you don't get it, you won't survive. So you really do need to seek the in-person connections, even more so than you do the social connections. And I think it's coming out. I feel a little validated because some of my friends read the drafts of my book and they're like, wow, you're really tough on social media. And not that I was blaming social media for everything. I just didn't feel like it was a really great positive wellness part of our life. In fact, it was negatively impacting our wellness. And now I feel validated because now a lot of the studies that have come out, a lot of the things that people are seeing, they're like, yeah, you know what? We need to digital detox. We need to get away from some of this stuff because it can be very detrimental. Now, we also know that August is National Make a Will Month, and one of my 7 wellness elements of Me Time Monday book is financial wellness. And how does that relate to making a will? Well, you want to have 2 things that that you have as you get older. And I would say 50 is kind of that's D-Day. 50, if you haven't done this by 50, do it immediately. I think you should do it earlier, but I didn't. I will tell you, I didn't. So I was one of those late bloomers. But by 50, you really should have a will. And you need to have 2 wills. What does that mean? You need to have a will that deals with your estate. Who gets the house, who gets the Porsche, who gets, whatever. Not saying I have those things. I have a house. I don't have a Porsche. But, that's like assets, right? Those are tangible things you want to maybe pass on to certain people. That's one part of it. Usually an estate plan is what covers that. The other will that is equally as important is a living will, or really a lot of people call them healthcare directives. And that means that you are explaining what type of medical care and life-sustaining care you want should something happen to you. Should you fall into a coma? Should you be in a traumatic accident and you can't speak for yourself, or whatever it is, then you want this to exist so that you can tell people, no, I don't want to be intubated. Yes, I do want to be resuscitated if this happens. Here's who. So that's your living will. Those are your wishes. Just like your estate will is your wishes of who you want to give things to. Okay, so those are the 2 things. And that's the thing you need to make sure that you have absolutely by 50. Now, the other things that are important, and we're going to bring on an expert to our podcast to talk about this, but then once the wishes are set in that living will, then you have to also have durable powers of attorney on who's going to speak for you, who's going to make sure those wishes get carried out, whether it's your financial wishes or whether it is your medical care end of life wishes. And you can designate the same person or 2 different people for those. So those are also equally important. And there are a couple other documents, but those are the big 3. And you want to make sure that you have those. And since August is National Make a Will Month, I thought I would just bring it up because I came across a statistic that 62% of the sandwich generation. Now, these are people who have children they're still caring for, and they're also caring for an older loved one. And maybe that older loved one is relying on them financially. Certainly, they're relying on them from a caregiving perspective to be there for them, help them through things, maybe even do some of the physical care, right? So if something happens to you, both your kids and your older parent, what happens to them? It is essential that the sandwich generation have a living will. And that means that if you are 42 in your sandwich generation, you should have a will. Don't wait till 50. So once that kind of happens in your life, if you're sandwich generation, you need to do that. But 62% don't have one, which is really scary. Only 27% of people over 50 have completed a living will or healthcare directive, according to a poll that was done by the National, I think this is the Palliative Health Association, but 27%, that's like less than 1 in 3. So a couple of resources for you to get this done, because you don't have to go to an attorney and spend a fortune. There's a lot of now online services. There's Will and Trust, I think is one. Goodwill, Good Trust. We'll have links to all of those, and we're going to get one of those experts, at least one of them, on the podcast. But you can also check out Caring Info. This is a program from the National Alliance for Care at Home. It has a whole list of advanced directives and where you can fill one out. And then you, of course, you get it notarized and all that, but you make it official. Also, the National Academy for Elder Law Attorneys, so NALA, getting in touch with an elder law attorney, particularly as you become a caregiver and your family needs to do more of a family plan now. Your parents' financial picture and care picture and your financial picture and care picture should not be separated. You kind of need to look at it all in aggregate and decide how are we going to manage this longevity or whatever it is. And that's where an elder law attorney is really great because they're trained and certified in understanding more about Medicare and Medicaid, all of the long-term care benefits and things that can really help you save a lot of money. And then finally, in our caregiver wellness segment, August 26th is National Dog Day. You guys know I'm a huge dog lover. As I mentioned, my little baby is turning 10 this month, which is perfect. And I have a blog about the 10 things I learned from her that I think make me a better person, make me happier, gonna hopefully make me live longer. So I'm gonna have a link to that blog. But I also wanted to bring to you a new study that recently came out. There's been several studies, by the way, over the course of maybe like the last year. This recent one was from the University of Vienna, and it was understanding dogs' emotions as they relate to their human counterparts, right? So we know that there's certainly a lot of bonding that goes on between a quote unquote owner or mom and dad of a dog. There is that connection. It's built over thousands of years. You know, this is why a dog is called man's best friend. I always say God intended it this way because dog spelled backwards is God. So whatever you think about, you know, the whole perspective of being a dog parent, it's really important in our lives. It's also essential in the lives of older adults. It's a lifeline. Particularly if you're a solo ager, having that little companion, that little furry heartbeat sitting next to you, making you warm, those melting eyes looking up at you, letting you know, I love you, I love you, I love you. I'm here for you. I never judge you. They're the best, right? We don't even get some of that from our human friends and companions. So having a dog is the best thing ever. But what this research found is that if not just the owner, and this is what's interesting, it's even strangers, but if a stranger approaches a dog or you as the owner are talking to your dog, when you smile, and they can interpret, of course, your facial, because they also know when you're sad and they come and comfort you. But when you smile, boom, doggy dopamine. It just gives them this hit, this reward, the tail goes, and that even happens with strangers. So, you know, you want to kind of bring that smile out. And as we know, smiling in general not only helps with the muscles in your face, but it actually does give yourself a boost of that dopamine, which is a release of positivity. So this whole positivity connection is being shown and seen in studies done between dogs and humans. And, you know, quite frankly, it's also true between human to human connection. I find that when I smile, whether I'm in the grocery store or I'm in the airport, walking down the terminal, when I proactively smile at somebody, they almost always smile back. I would say like 99.9%. And so you spark a little bit of dopamine for them and maybe make their day a little bit better. And it's just a boost. It's a boost. It's hard to do when we're feeling down. Something tragic is happening. We're worried about, you know, mom or dad or whatever it is. Yeah, those days are hard. But we bounce back. We have other days. And on those other days, if we can bring the smile out, it is a little bit contagious. It'll spark other smiles. And, you know, I think we talk a lot about kindness and happiness. We, you know, put it on t-shirts and pillows, but how much do you really practice it? And this is one of those self-care in 7 minutes, self-care in 7 seconds that you can do, just giving yourself the smile, which kind of gives you the burst inside that you know, made somebody feel good, and also having somebody smile back at you. And all of a sudden you've got this little tiny bonding with some stranger, you know, wherever you are. So I think that's it for our wellness segment. Yes, and we are going to move on now to Well Home Design News. Well, welcome to our Well Home Design News. We've got a couple of different articles that have appeared that I thought would be interesting to share with you. I wanted to mention that I think I mentioned earlier up front, I'm working on my third book, The Snug Home. And the Snug Home is kind of the extension of one of my 7 wellness elements, which I think I forgot to list in the very intro to all of this newscast. But it's one of the most important ones, which is environmental wellness. And, a lot of people think environmental meaning the outside world and how we protect the planet and all that. I use environmental wellness in a different way because I, again, studied the science, studied the research studies that showed that our environments have a huge impact on our health, particularly our mental health. And I found that fascinating, again, because my book was so much based on neuroscience and how the brain works. This interaction with our environments is something I wanted to explore more. Therefore, we have the next book coming out, The Snug Home. It's kind of like each time I write a book, there's an element that I just feel like, okay, I don't have enough time or enough pages to drill down and give you more. So that's going to become the next book in the series. But anyway, going back to these headlines that I've been seeing, there was one that I came across in one of the interior design online publications that I read all the time, and it was called Soft Architecture. And there's a lot of new terms that are coming out, by the way, now in terms of interior design. So soft architecture is based upon things where you don't have a lot of sharp right angles, 90-degree angles. Um, Tactile things look softer, look more natural, soft to the touch, all of that. And so this really speaks to one of the things I've been writing about that will become a big part of the Snug Home book, and that is the 5 C's of design. And that includes color and contrast and curves and comfort sources. And what was the other one? Oh, clutter free. Ooh, one of the most important ones. But I'm going to focus today on curves. And I kind of describe this as we're going from curb appeal, when real estate agents tell you what you should do for your home to make it more appealing. And then there's now curve appeal. So in this article, they talk about things like fabric walls instead of just painted walls. Kind of wallpaper almost can create a cocoon, in a room that makes you feel, gives you that sanctuary feeling that you're looking for. Certainly anything like counters have a bullnose edge, so it's rounded. Couches are curved. Living room, dining room tables are round or oval, not squared or rectangle. Lots of sharp elements like glass, lead, metals you kind of want to use in a minimum. Now, certain people have a certain aesthetic for their design. And for instance, like me, I like kind of a blend of, it's very kind of eclectic because it's kind of a Art Deco, um, you know, blend with more comfy, cozy. And they're almost in opposition to each other because the Art Deco is more about metals, but it's also about velvets. It is about softness and stuff like that. So I guess there's a connection there. But you wanted. Oh, this is one that's really interesting: fluted and reeded glass, like on your bathroom shower doors. That's becoming very much now in vogue, and that is kind of like eye candy because it's got a slight curve and it almost kind of makes the brain think about water, which of course that's exactly what you're going to walk into when you walk into your shower. Drapery, all of these things that kind of provide things. This is interesting. Drapery, and I'm just reading here, provides insulation and sound absorption. And of course, sound is one of our 5 senses. It's on our checklist that's another part of the Snug Home. So it's the 5 C's. Then you've got the 5 senses, which is, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. How do you emphasize that? And then how does all of this get put in the blender and become neurodesign, which is really the focus of the book, is neurodesign, which is this new evolution of interior design now, is making sure that whatever we bring into our living spaces, our to create environmental wellness, is going to spark, whether it's dopamine or whether it's that comforting warmth in the brain. And those are the things that you want to have happen when you walk into your home or into different rooms or whatever. So it's really about, the cozy decor, warm colors and textures. Um, and, I probably repeat myself a lot, but for those of you who don't listen to every single newscast I do or all of the newscasts, one of the reasons why this is such a trend right now in this neurodesign is because we have learned so much more about the brain and brain health. It's really only been over the last 30 years or so that researchers have really understood how the brain works. And in addition to that, we go back in our history to when we first started to really become humans living out on the African savanna. We were out in nature, so the greens and the blue skies and the fresh air and the shelter of trees, and seeing the greenery and maybe even some colors that meant, okay, this is a safe place. There's a water source around here. There's a food source around here. All of that, boom, 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 sending messages, neurotransmitting to the brain, what we call the ancient brain, which is the survival part of our brain that we still have, but we ignore it in our modern world because now we have the frontal lobes and the rationale thinking and analyzing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've kind of overlooked and forgotten about the ancient brain, the survival part of the brain that just says, what about me? And that's about these comfort things. It's about evoking that ancient, beautiful skies, beautiful exterior, comfort, safe places that we still need, and we need to bring that back. And that's what neurodesign is all about. It's about tapping into that ancient brain and bringing those elements back into the design of your home, which is ultimate wellness. So as we get older, and really it doesn't even, as a gerontologist, as you know, I don't just study older people. I study across your lifespan. What are the choices that you're making? What are the things that we should be thinking about that make us happier, healthier, and ultimately live longer, right? So neurodesign is something like for children. There's something called containment when we talk about interior design. And containment is where you might have bookshelves, you might have something surrounding the bed, you might have magical wallpaper, whatever it is. But containment is something that makes children feel safe in their rooms. Curves are great because for that, again, the ancient brain is at work in little children, and having curves brings a soothing instead of the sharp, angular curves and things that you may have. So it's not just for older people, but it is soothing across our lifespan. So whether we're a stressed out caregiver, we're an anxious kid, or we're an older person who just, wants to feel like our homes are our sanctuaries that we can be in forever, this whole neurodesign is really coming to be, if you will. So I will have a little bit more information about this, but this whole soft architecture plays into the wellness movement that's happening in the home, tapping into neurodesign. And I'm really excited because it's going to play well in my book with the 5 C's. The curves are really important. And so when you look at your home, kind of just take a little assessment. What in your home is curved and what in your home is more angular or sharp? So what happens is when the ancient brain sees something sharp, it's like, oh, stay away, it's going to hurt you, it's going to prickle you, or whatever. And as we know, as we get older, we lose our balance a little bit. You kind of bump into walls, or you bump into counters, or tables or whatever. If it's got a sharp point on it, not only are you going to get that really great bruise, but you could even pierce the skin because our skin gets a lot thinner as we age, and we're a lot more vulnerable to skin tears and things like that. So this is why stay away from the sharp and go for the curves. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, and I've talked about this before on a few of our newscasts, but again, 8 out of 10 older adults say, I want to stay in my home as long as possible. I don't want to move to senior living. I don't hopefully need to go to memory care. or have anything that's going to require me to leave my home. Okay, great. So that's the plan. That's the dream. How do we make the dream happen? You can only really make it happen if you come up with what we call a life plan for your home. Usually that starts with universal design. Universal design is our ageless things. It's everything from an OXO good grip can opener that you can grip more carefully, even if you have arthritis, all the way up to, you need to have a walk-in shower. You need to make sure that your doorways are wide enough, potentially for a walker or a wheelchair, and other assistive and safety type things that you do to the home. That's universal design. That's usually ageless. It's good for anyone from 8 months to, 8 decades and more. That's the start. That's the foundation. Then we get into more of this wellness, which is about neurodesign. And the wellness comes into color psychology, biophilic design, which is bringing nature inside. Some of the things I've talked about, the 5 Cs, the 5 senses, all of those things come into play now in this next level of evolution, if you will, which is all about neurodesign. And so you have to have a plan for not only your safety and accessibility as you get older. You need grab bars in the shower. Yeah, and they are beautiful, by the way. For any of you who haven't seen all of these, I'm seeing millions of commercials about redoing your bathroom. And, it's stunning. The design doesn't scream, oh my gosh, I'm old and vulnerable. It's just a part of the overall look and feel. And so don't be afraid of the grab bars anymore. And they're very essential, by the way, or the benches in the showers and all that kind of stuff. They're just gorgeous and they can be built in. Um, but you have to have a plan for the safety and accessibility. And you have to overlay that now with the neurodesign, right? Because as we get older, our eyes don't see as well. So, for instance, we know that greens are the color we see the longest with our eyesight because it's in the middle of the color nanospectrum that we use for color, psychology and other things. It's the most optimistic color because it evokes nature, it evokes thriving, surviving, doing well, but also it's a color we see the longest. So greens are really great, all different kinds of greens. Blues are also very calming, very soothing. But there's other colors too. You want to try to avoid the really stark colors, the bright reds, the red room from 50 Shades of Grey, right? You want to avoid that maybe a little bit. Uh, so it's interesting to look at some of these other things too, the curves, having comfort sources that you can see that aren't just in a box in the attic. So all of those things come into play when it comes to neurodesign, and it's becoming a very, very sophisticated component now of architecture, building design. Certainly, it's been used pervasively in commercial building and design. And now it's, kind of trickling down into our homes because we're living longer and we need these things around us to, help with that kind of mental health, psychological health that can come with neurodesign. So a couple of things for you there. Oh, so what I was going to say is, okay, 8 in 10 older people want to stay living in their homes, but less than half have a plan to do that. So again, 50 is kind of like a good age to think about, okay, over the next 3 decades, what do we need to do? Because you don't need to do it all at once, but like, okay, this decade, what are we going to fix, update, whatever? The next decade, what are we going to? And I'm even finding myself as I get older, there's something that we in gerontology, when we're talking about interior design, there's a little phrase that we use from the nose to the knees, and it's all about what can you reach easily, pull out, pull down, whatever. But you want everything to be between the nose and the knees, because anytime you have to bend way down and maybe you're on medications, you get dizzy, or you get up on a ladder, now you've got, a safety hazard. And again, you may get dizzy, you have to reach way up there, whatever, or you strain a muscle or create a cramp, by reaching in the wrong direction or something. All of those things are not good as we get older and you start to really feel it at a certain age. It's like, oh, wow. not 40 anymore. So, we need to just plan for that. And so, as much as you can create that in your space that's between nose and knees, that's the best. Other than that, you're going to want things that definitely you can pull down so you don't have to get up, and things that maybe roll out easily or whatever, so you don't have to do a lot of bending and sitting on the floor to get things and all that kind of stuff. So here are some resources for you. First of all, the HHS has a separate group called the Association or Administration for Community Living, ACL. Under the ACL, there is something called the Center for Independent Living. Now, this is a really great resource. We're going to have the link on our episode guide page. And it's state by state. It's a listing of home modification vendors that do things that are specific for disabilities or mobility issues as we age. So they really understand, obviously, the aging process, and these vendors can be tapped to come out. It probably will be an out-of-pocket expense, but there's going to be information as well on the website of maybe how you can get these things covered. Could it be under a veterans benefit? Could it be under a disability type benefit or whatever? A couple other resources you may want to be aware of. State by state, there are organizations called Rebuilding Together. It's a nonprofit, and they will, come out and help retrofit an older person's home who can't do it, and they'll do it for free. So you have to kind of apply to the charity, tell them your story or your loved one's story. They do small things. They'll do they can do grab bars, but you want to always make sure if you're redoing your shower that you get someone who really knows about how aging works, the kind of strength you need on that grab bar so it doesn't come right out of the wall. You've got to ground it. And if it's not grounded properly, it's not going to do you any good. So you really do need people who have gone through something called CAPS certification, which is Certified Aging in Place Specialist. There are a couple other organizations that do these certifications as well. CAPS has been around the longest. It's associated with the National Association of Home Builders. And it's everybody from a handyman to a carpenter to a builder, a lot of different people in the building and even interior design space go through this certification in the same way our attorneys who want to be elder law attorneys go through a certification now to really understand what is needed for older adults, how to ground those grab bars, how to place them properly, everything you could think of. And it's really important because we are a society that is living longer. We've got more and more parents and grandparents we're caring for now than children. We do want to know there are specialists. You can't just turn to anybody and expect them to know these things. You do have to go through these certifications, get your training. And so just know that these specialists exist. You should always ask about it. Make sure the people you're bringing into the home have that type of background or certified training. But CAP specialists are great. You can find them on this Center for Independent Living, but you can also use Rebuilding Together. Habitat for Humanity now has in-home services that they provide for veterans with disabilities or other people with disabilities, like maybe with MS or older adults. And again, they'll come in and they'll do small modifications, but they're volunteers. So they may be great carpenters or they may be great, whatever. Just make sure that they know what they're doing if they're going to do things like, grab bars and things like that. You could also, of course, go to things like Angie. So that's an online service provider for handyman and stuff, or some of these others. I don't know, Thumbtack. You guys probably know better than I. But again, ask the question on the certification for CAPS or some type of aging specialist. Make sure you get that person into the home. ADA specialist also is something you may want to look for. ADA means American Disabilities Act specialist, and that usually does cover a lot of the issues that older people have as well, but it was designed back in the 90s for people with disabilities. So if they have an ADA certification, a CAPS aging certification, those are all good. So that's it for our Well Home Design news. Now we're going to turn to caregivers in the workplace. when it comes to caregiving in the workplace, I always like to stay on top of the trends, whether it's employer benefits, whether it's different programs that are being created to really recognize and support the caregivers who are employees who are also working. And as we know, statistically, 1 in 5 employees are caring for an older adult. Now, that could be a spouse, it could be a sibling, it could definitely be an older parent or in-law or grandparent. And then 1 in 3 employees are caring for children. And then we have this mashup in the middle of 18 million Americans who are sandwich generation, which means they're caring for both generations. They're caring for children and they're caring for older parents typically. So the focus on caregivers and the impact of caregiving on employees in the workplace is a trend that's just been growing and growing and growing. And again, part of that is because we have longevity, we have people living longer. We also have people wanting to stay in the workforce longer. It isn't just an automatic, retire at 62 kind of thing anymore. And we see that a lot with a lot of the boomer population who is, trying to stay in the workforce and if not, create an encore career or whatever. So, with all that said, People Magazine does an annual issue on something they called Companies That Care, which is really great, such a positive message. And so they highlight the top 100 companies that they have analyzed who are doing really great things, mostly from a volunteer perspective. So it could be that they are encouraging their employees to participate in different philanthropic, charitable good works as volunteers. But it could also be that they are funding certain things for, different issues that happen in our society or whatever it is. Or they're creating programs that also do support their employees through some of these more challenging times. So I took a look at the top 100 list this year, and there were 7 that jumped out at me. In fact, I think these were the only 7, if I'm correct, of companies that were recognized because specifically they were supporting caregivers or older adult populations in these efforts. So I want to do a shout out because these companies are obviously what we would consider best practices, right? This has to be the trend going forward. I think a lot of organizations are dedicated to different types of charitable work because maybe the CEO had a child who had childhood cancer, and so they're going to support St. Jude's or American Cancer Society or whatever it is. So you have, obviously you have a lot of that going on, but we also need to just recognize the need to support the older population, the caregivers who are in the workplace on that. Okay. So I am and I've been writing a lot. I've written a lot of articles around what are the trends that the C-suite should be looking at to support caregivers at work. How do ERGs, employee resource groups or business resource groups, how should they be forming family caregiving specific or at least lifespan caregiving so you can include parenting all the way through senior care in something like that. I've been going out and doing a lot of really great talks. Shout out to companies like JP Morgan Chase, General Mills, Raymond James. I mean, you name it. I love the speaking engagements because it really gives me energy from the audience. And also I get a lot of really, great feedback from the audience, great interaction. So I really love going out and doing those talks with employees in the workplace, in terms of what they should be thinking about, what they should expect, how to bring that balance, that work-life balance, into play, which is always a real challenge for caregivers, particularly the sandwich generation. And I talk about going from a care-aware company, which every company out there, every organization understands the longevity challenge, the caregiving challenge. Now, whether or not they've addressed it or done much, or whether they've just done like checklist items, a lot of people just feel like, well, if we do this and this, okay, we're good, we're done. So going from care aware to caring culture is really different. And these companies I'm going to talk about, these are caring culture companies. So if you're looking for a new job and it's important to you to work for someone who really thinks about others and has not only good bottom line sense but also good societal support and sense, then these are some you may want to think about. Um, oh, and let me go through a couple stats. I already mentioned the 1 in 5 and 1 in 3. 53% are caring for children and older parents at the same time. That's your sandwich generation. So 50% of employees. 50% of employees said caregiving increases their stress at work. Of course, that's kind of a no-brainer. But oh, I'm sorry, that was 60%. Okay, 6 and 10. 40% of employers are aware their employees need caregiving support. So 4 in 10 employers are care aware. We need to get that to 100%, folks. Four out of 10 is not good enough. So we got to do some work there. 50% of employees who are also caregivers say their direct supervisor or boss is unaware of their caregiving struggles. Now, this could be because you feel there's a stigma. You don't want to be seen as less productive or letting the team down or having to take, extra time here or there, because you are caregiving for an older loved one. So it could be the stigma, could be the relationship that you have with your boss. Maybe you just feel like they just wouldn't be empathetic if you brought it up. So you're going to keep it in the shadows or whatever. So one of the things I talk about, particularly with HR departments, is need for better training of those supervisors, middle management. They need to be aware and empathetic of what's going on with employees on their team who may be caregiving and how that impacts them. And then what are the solutions and what can they connect them to that HR has? A lot of employees don't even realize that their HR departments offer some really great benefits and services and help. And so all of that just gets left on the table. Caregivers navigate on their own and they struggle. We need to make a better education, communication connection. So bravo to these caring culture companies. And I'm going to read from you from the People Magazine Caring Companies list. And I'm going to give you the ranking that they had on the people list. So number 8, this is the top company in terms of companies that are caring about caregivers, is the Veterans United Home Loans. They actually had an employee who was a U.S. Army veteran, mother of 4, but one of her children had sickle cell disease, and she was really struggling because she had, obviously the special needs of this child while she's also parenting her other children. It was referenced that she also had older parents, so I'm assuming she was sandwich generation. So the company actually got together and did like a GoFundMe type of thing with employees. So they got employees involved and empathetic about it, but they paid off her mortgage. Now, this is something that an organization called Tunnel to Towers, which I just love, nonprofit, does for veterans and for fallen first responders. It's amazing. I mean, to not have to worry about where you're going to live as you struggle through all of these things is a huge gift. So they're number 8, Veterans United Home Loans. Number 13, Plant Moran. I think it's Moran or Moran. It's Moran. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, so apologies. They have a flex program that places ambassadors in every office to help with caregiver guidance. So these are like caregiver mentors. Maybe you've been a caregiver yourself, you've been through the wars, the little ins and outs and the frustrations and the struggles, and you can mentor someone who's just now stepping into that role. Or it's just somebody who really wants to help out people who are stressed at work over caregiving and get them connected to the right resources and the right support that they need. Fantastic program. And they've also partnered with Home Watch Caregivers to create caregiving webinars. Good on ya. We love it. Number 18, Edward Jones. Okay, this is a big one. This is over the last decade. Edward Jones has been a big hero in the Alzheimer's community because they have been the national lead sponsor for the Alzheimer's Association Walk to End Alzheimer's walks that are done all across the country and pretty much every city, every county that you can think of. And Edward Jones is always they're the lead sponsor out there. They have underwritten a lot of this across the country, and they've raised over $55 million among their employees, getting sponsors, getting sponsored to do the walk. Really amazing work, and we have to do a big shout out to Edward Jones because they are very specific and very intentional, and they have said they will continue this support at least through 2030. So again, bravo. Number 33, American Express. So they have a lot of really great programs for employees. One is called Healthy Minds, and it is based more around mental health. But we know that caregivers in the workplace struggle with the stress, the depression, the anxiety, the mental health issues of caregiving. And then you couple that with maybe the stigma of not being able to tell people at work or tell your boss or share or whatever. So they've also created support groups for family caregivers, and executive leadership has shared their experiences. This is probably one of the most important things that can happen is if you have a CEO, and I'm just going to do a little shout out to Brad Wilson, who is a relatively new CEO of care.com. And they do a lot of really great surveys that we've talked about on this newscast. But he recently shared his own personal experience in being a caregiver for his wife, who he lost to cancer, and he's got young children, and how much care.com helped him, which is one of the reasons why then he actually went for the CEO job. But he has shared his story. So now from the top down, employees know he gets it. He's going to be empathetic to my situation just because he's gone through this experience himself. And so it really sets the stage for an openness, I think, for communication, and for there to be a focus on, hey, we care about you as a person as much as we care about you as a productive employee who's helping us to be successful at our business. And so that's a really important element. And American Express does the same with their executive leaders. That normalizes any kind of stigma that you might have felt. It makes people feel that they can talk about it. And I just want to do a shout out to American Express because of the companies that are listed here. I've been really honored to work with their HR department on doing caregiving education webinars and different things for their employees, and focusing a lot on that wellness, that balance in life, but certainly all other types of topics around caregiving. So thank you very much, American Express, for putting those on and having me as part of that. Number 27 is a company called The Wonderful Company. Now, you may not recognize that name, but they have brands like Palm, Fiji water, Palm is the pomegranate juice, Fiji water, Teleflora, lots of other big brands that you would know that are under the umbrella of The Wonderful Company. They have a wonderful health and wellness program that includes free health services, therapy, and connections to social services for employees and their families, including older parents. Wow, that's comprehensive. That's amazing. And again, a best practice, a great benefit, and one of the reasons why you're going to stay loyal to that employer because they understand you've got a family and maybe older parents, and everybody needs support in healthcare because it's such a fragmented system. To get some of these connected through your employer is really terrific. They also, because they do a lot of work in more of the farmlands, I know Central California, obviously farmlands across the country. They also do a mobile health clinic and on-site health stations in their different plants and their orchards where their employees are. So you can do virtual doctor visits and things like that. So they've really gone above and beyond when it comes to the healthcare of the family. And that's The Wonderful Company. Number 69 is SCAN. And little shout out, SCAN is a health plan that is for Medicare eligible and Medicaid eligible adults. They focus a lot on what we call the dual eligibles, which means you have both Medicare, you're older, over 65, and your Medicaid, meaning you qualify for help and financial assistance from whatever state that you are in. SCAN happens to be headquartered here in Southern California, where I am, so they're just like right down the freeway from me. I know them well. They have over 5,500 members who were in the fire zones when we had the horrific fires in January of 2025. um, they had a lot of members of their health plans that were older and much more vulnerable in evacuating and all of that during a disaster. And so they reached out with live assistance. They used a mobile medical van and they went out and did basic health checks of older adults just to make sure, air care wise, how are your lungs? How are you doing? What can we help with? So shout out to SCAN for being that emergency responder. And then number 97 in the top 100 is a company called Cadence, and they have something called Global Recharge Days. And because they are an international company, a worldwide company, they give their employees dedicated time each month to step back and just reset. So in addition to the time off that you might need for doctor visits or the time off you might take personally for a vacation, you can also do a global recharge day. And that's whenever, you feel you need it. Obviously, you probably hope to plan it ahead with your boss and all that kind of stuff. But it really recognizes caregiver burnout, which is so huge, and the need for the respite breaks for caregiver wellness. Now, in the article, it did not say if they made a connection to a home care service company that could also provide a respite break. So you might be taking your global recharge days and then using it to be with your older loved one, which isn't necessarily recharging you. It might, you might feel like you've got some real quality time with your loved one and you don't have to worry about work that day. But at the same time, you still need a good respite break. So my hope is that a lot of the caregiving employees who take these global recharge days can get connected to respite services, some of which can be found for free, and get the break that they need from all of it, from work, from caregiving, from kids, whatever it is, and just get a little bit recharged to come back and again be refreshed and reset on all of the responsibilities that they have. So that's it for the People magazine, Companies That Care. It's great they do this. Big shout out to them and their partner. They're great places to work, and keep it up. And we look forward to having more companies in that top 100 that are focused on older adults and family caregivers. Now, let's move on to pop culture. So, for pop culture for this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the tragic news that just actually uh, broke, if you will, a couple of days ago, right as we were going into production on this newscast. And it was the death of the actress Hayden Panetierre, who was only 36. And there's still a lot of things we don't know about this tragedy. It does appear that she had cardiac arrest. She was at an apartment that sounds like it was owned by her boyfriend of the last 5 years, and not sure if drugs were involved. We do know she has had a history of having, some drug issues, also some mental health issues. Tragically, she has a very young daughter, but that daughter is not being raised by Hayden. She's being raised by Hayden's ex-partner, who was I can't remember what country he's from, maybe even Ukraine, but he's a professional wrestler. And so, because of all of her struggles, she has not been a consistent mother for her daughter. And it's just, it's one of those tales because as the details start to emerge, for those people who already knew, but for those of us who maybe didn't, Hayden started her acting career at 11 months. Her parents, her mother, got her into commercials, and then she swiftly gained steam and success from there. She was one of the stars of a series called The Heroes, where she played this they were like had amazing abilities and superpowers, and she was a cheerleader who had this amazing ability. I can't remember what her superpower was, but she was also more recently in the TV series Nashville as a singer, country singer. Anyway, a very talented woman, but only 36, and her life has ended. So the reason why I wanted to really talk about this story is not so much about the pressures of Hollywood, and particularly the Hollywood stars, that there are so few stories that are positive of Hollywood stars. Um, the ones uh, that I think we think about or hear about all the time are the ones that are tragic and end tragically, whether it's River Phoenix or, Brittany Murphy, or I think her name was Laura Trachtenberg, who was even in a movie with Hayden Panetierre. Anyway, all of these very young stars who started out young in their careers and just really struggled throughout. And, it, again, we don't know if this was foul play. We don't know if it was just because she had so many health issues, particularly at this point in her life. She was seen coming off an airplane using, help to walk. She had crutches, but she didn't have a broken leg or broken foot or anything like that. It was probably more maybe around the cardiovascular health and issues she was suffering from. We don't know. But it speaks to a couple of things, and it kind of sparked for me, again, these are more, if you will, suicides. But, for me, when Kate Spade, the fashion designer Kate Spade, was found dead, and she was only 55. And unfortunately, hers was a suicide, as was the celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain, who was only 61. And by the way, they're doing a bioflic movie on him now of his early days. But he was on CNN Parts Unknown. And he also was the author of Kitchen Confidential, which was a bestseller. And then, interestingly, other chefs, because it's such a high pressure job, right? That chef position and really managing the kitchen, and everything has to be done like right on time, and perfectly. But Chef Anne Burrell, she was on the Food Network. She was only 55, committed suicide. Charlie Trotter was 54. He had a string of famous restaurants under his name, Charlie Trotter, that started in Chicago. And he had a stroke at 55. And so the reason why I'm bringing all this forward is I think it speaks to burnout. People are under high pressure in some of these positions and jobs. Hollywood is a eat you alive kind of community. I grew up in the shadows of Hollywood. I grew up in, Southern California. I went to a college that had a lot of celebrity kids that I went to college with, or even celebrities themselves, that went on to star in different movies and TV shows and things like that. And so I kind of saw from the outside, the pressures that people are under. And it doesn't mean you have to succumb. In my first book, which I did interviews with a lot of different celebrities that were caregivers, the first person who said yes to me was Holly Robinson Peete. And I always give great gratitude to her for being that kind of, she opened up the gate, if you will, for me, I think, to talk to other people. And she was so free with what she shared. But she was a very young woman when her father was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then later in life, as she got married, one of her twins was diagnosed with autism. It caused her and her husband, USC football player, shout out to the Trojans, Rodney Peete, to create the Holly Rod Foundation to support both Parkinson's and autism, which is a really phenomenal nonprofit organization that they have run for years and years now. But she was a young actress, and her mom was her manager. Now, maybe because she was 18 and she had gone to college, maybe she had it more together than a child actor does, like an 11-month-old who's not making any of their own decisions, right? But she had that caring cocoon of her mom, who had her best interest, at heart, her dad, who was already in the business, so he could kind of tell her how to navigate and the challenges, and that. Then having a really strong marriage, certainly I think helped Holly. But she actually tweeted about Hayden Panettiere, and she expressed something I was feeling too. And her comment in this tweet was basically, you're the one that got your daughter into Hollywood at a vulnerable age of being a little child, 11 months old, not even a year old. And, obviously didn't help her and guide her and steer her correctly, because she started taking drugs at 15. It was, it's the Elizabeth Taylor story. It starts with like sleeping pills, and then it's like the pep pills to keep you up, and da 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 da. And now all of a sudden you're on 20 different meds, and it's the Matthew Perry story. It's all of these actors that are so vulnerable, and they're vulnerable in terms of their mental health. Some of them do have mental health issues. I can't remember what Hayden was diagnosed with. I think it may have been bipolar disorder, but she did have mental health issues as well. Chicken and the egg, what came first, drugs or mental health? We don't know. But they go hand in hand very often. Anyway, and one of the things that I learned as a gerontologist is, of all the things you can do, and again, in my Me Time Monday book, I break down 7 elements of your life. And all of them are important, but probably the most important is your social wellness, your social health. And that is based on a lot of research, a lot of evidence-backed studies done over the years, but particularly the Harvard Adult Development Study I've talked about, which has been done now for over 85 years and still is ongoing. And I interviewed Mark Schultz, who wrote the book about the Harvard Health Study. And the one thing that he and the other Robert Waldinger and the other researchers there have said is the number one thing that you can do to live happy, healthy, and longer is have a good social health, social support network. You've got to have a confidant who has your back, at least one. And then you have to have really strong people around you. Now, these aren't people who are yes men. These aren't people who are sycophants and sucking your life away, as we find so many of the circles, if you will, around these celebrities. It's almost like it's a magnet for bad people to hang on to these actors and just tell them they're great and never help them when they need to say, hey, you've got a problem, we got to fix this, or you need help or whatever. So unfortunately in Hollywood, I think that happens, where you have the worst social health, social wellness, with few exceptions, Holly Robinson Peete being a great exception. But unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast there. But for the rest of us out here, outside of La La Land, we do need those social supports, and caregivers more than ever, caregivers more than anyone. You need your confidant. You need your person who has your back, has your six. You need a good circle of support, whether those are friends that make you laugh, get you outside of the house to get a cup of coffee or go for a walk, help out with the kids, help out with your mom and dad. It's just there to listen, when you want to vent or whatever. And you have friends for different things, right? Different friends can motivate you here or support you here or whatever it is. You need that social health. And so this is why I wanted to touch upon this tragic story with Hayden Panetierre, because she didn't have any of that. Apparently this boyfriend was beating on her. So she sounds like a classic domestic violence victim. And she kept going back to him, right? She had started drugs at 15 and never really got away from them. We know she had mental health issues. We know she had to make the very tragic decision for a mother to let go of her child and not be raising her own child. She was, in the body of the beast in Hollywood, trying to stay fit, trying to stay beautiful, trying to stay young. Even at 36, they don't think they're young enough, right? All of these pressures were on her. The burnout, I'm sure, being an actress since the age of 11 months, there's got to be some burnout there. But these are all things that I can also look at our caregiving population and say, burnout, not getting the right support, not having good partners or confidants around you, not being able to get that respite break, be healthy but not be pressured to be perfect. Is really important. And we see so much now with caregiver burnout. I mean, some of the stuff I saw during the pandemic absolutely alarmed me. There was one study that was done by Archangels, which is a great group that we know that does a lot of caregiver stress surveys and other things. And they found that there was a 52% suicidal ideation rate among caregivers during the pandemic. That is like scary. And so the mental health, emotional health aspect of caregiving is important, and we need to address it. And we don't want to fall into victimhood. We don't want to say, I'm a caregiver, so I'm a victim. No, that's not it. You're a caregiver and you're doing a heck of a job. You're one of the most valuable people in our society because you're propping up the long-term care healthcare system. Um, but what we need to do is we need to give you the tools, give you the support, make sure that you've got the balance and again, the social health balance in particular to continue and carry on and have a joyful life yourself. So, it's unfortunate that so many people are lacking that in our lives. But if you can look at your life and assess your life, if you can look at the people around you and see a friend who might be struggling or a friend who doesn't have, maybe that kind of support or whatever, it's just important for us to help each other and reach out. But caregiver burnout is real. And it's not about the individual. I talk about caregiver burnout in the workplace. And caregiver burnout in the workplace is interesting because the pressures of the job feed into the caregiver burnout. But a lot of employers look at it like, well, it's the employee's fault or it's the employee's problem, and they've got to deal with their burnout. Not every employer. There are a lot of employers who are very empathetic, and certainly mental health is like number one right now in the workplace. So there are a lot of supports and services that employers are looking at to add as benefits for their employees and all of that. But it is a workplace issue, right? Depending on the culture of your company, whether that's a caring culture or whether that's a culture that is based on burnout, and some of them are. Um, the employers also have to take a little bit of ownership of this because the environment, again, that the caregivers are in as they're working is as important as their outside life because that's where that work-life balance comes in. That's where the ability to be resilient or to fight off things like burnout can, if you've got good supports in one or the other, it can help with the imbalance you get. So if you've got good social health supports, it can help with the stress at work. If you've got, really great support at work, it can help you kind of keep calm and carry on in terms of being a caregiver outside of work or whatever. But it's that balance that we need. And so there's responsibility on, both sides, if you will, when it's workplace related. And certainly I think just from a overall health, we need to think as much about our social health as we do. As I started this whole episode, it's about wellness, and most people think wellness is nutrition and exercise. That's only physical wellness, right? Those are just two things in physical wellness because let's add sleep, which is another physical wellness issue, or staying hydrated. But that's only 1/7 of your wellness circle that is important to have in balance. And social health, probably, I would put at the very top. So my heart goes out to, the friends of Hayden Panetierre. Her mother's tweet and comments about her passing were that's what I was going to say. Holly Robinson Peete really took her mom on because she's like, hey, you put this woman into this vicious, environment at 11 months and sink or swim, right? And her mom's comments were weird. I'm sorry. They were weird. They were just disjointed in terms of being like, dislocated from what was, I don't know, maybe she's, you know, got guilt and grief going on. I don't know. But I do know they didn't have a really great relationship. Her mom obviously was kind of a stage mom, and she certainly didn't help her daughter overcome and become resilient to some of these, the drug and the mental health issues and stuff that were impacting her. I agree with Holly. I mean, listen, parents have to take responsibility, right? We're so fragile as little people and little children, and the frontal lobe isn't even fully formed until your late 20s. So if you've been doing drugs since 15, or if you've had a mental health issue early in your teens or whatever that's not addressed, what can you expect? And so anyway, but not, again, not to be too critical, but it is a responsibility of parents. They've got to be engaged and involved in protecting their children, not just supporting them, but protecting them. We've forgotten about that, I think. There's so many examples right now in our society of how parents really haven't, as much as we would like to see, protected their kids. And that doesn't mean being a helicopter parent. That means raising your children with the right foundation for them to be strong and them to be independent and all that. But again, going back to the caregiver burnout comment that started all of this, I just feel like in all of these situations, whether it's Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain, um, Hayden Panettiere, they did not have the right social support. And if they had mental health issues, they weren't getting the right support for that as well. And those kind of sometimes do go hand in hand. So for all of you out there, if you have suicidal ideation, please call 988. It is your lifeline. Or if you know someone who's struggling, have them call 988. But also, let's protect each other. Let's protect the children, but let's also protect our older adults, and let's protect ourselves. And let's get ourselves to a good emotional, mental health, strength, resiliency state so that we can be the great caregivers that are so needed. And that's it for pop culture. That's a wrap for Caregiving Club Newscast this week. We hope you enjoyed these news segments. You can email us at info@caregivingclub.com to let us know a news story we should cover, or leave us a comment on our YouTube page. And don't forget to subscribe to our Caregiving Club YouTube channel to get all the caregiving news every other week, as well as our other content, our Me Time Monday Self-Care in 7 Minutes weekly videos, and our Caregiving Club On Air podcasts, which are available on our Caregiving Club YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, and other podcast listening channels. Find out more about Sherri and Caregiving Club at caregivingclub.com. Take care and stay well.